This is Ms. Wiles, and this is another example of a system of equations question. And this is what I would call an intermediate or more advanced problem than the ones that you have about ages. Because the problems that you have about people's ages, you can usually figure those out without writing any systems of equations if you think about it logically and if you think about it as far as the numbers go. This one, if you haven't already read it, go ahead and pause and read it. This one has more going on. You've got your first situation with 5 ham sandwiches and 5 sodas and a cost for that. And then for the second one, you've got 5 ham sandwiches and 7 sodas and a cost for that. This one is a more difficult question. So our first step is to come up with equations that represent what we have here in sentences. And in the first sentence, we have 5 ham sandwiches and 5 sodas, and the cost equals $25.40. That's the equation for the first sentence. In the second sentence, we have 5 ham sandwiches and 7 sodas that cost $29.18. Now, that's much more difficult to come up with some kind of logical thing, although you can start with guessing and checking. But what happens with guessing and checking is that there's a big you could guess $3.50 for the price of the sandwich just because that sounds good to you. But then you have to figure out what the other one might be and if it'll work. And it has to work for both of them. So that's really tough to do. So the best thing to do here is to examine equation 1 and equation 2 and come up with something that they have in common. When I look at these two, I see that both of them have the 5h. Both of them have a 5h in the equation. So if I knew what 5 ham sandwiches cost, I'd be good to go. So I'm going to choose one of those equations. We can choose number 1 just because. We'll choose number 1 and change it so that I know what 5 ham sandwiches cost in relationship to the sodas. So choose 1. And if I choose the 5h plus 5s equals 25.40, then 5 ham sandwiches has to cost 25.40 minus the cost of the 5 sodas. The 5 ham sandwiches has to cost $25.40 minus the cost of the 5 sodas. Then my next step, step 2, is to substitute that value into the other equation. Substitute that value into the other equation. And so equation 2 says 5h plus 7s equals 29.18. So instead of writing 5h, I'm going to substitute what I found from the other equation. I'm going to say 5h. Nope, I'm not going to use that. I'm going to use 25.40 minus 5s because 5h equals 25.40 minus 5s. And then I have to continue on. So then 25.40 minus 5s plus 7s has to equal 29.18 because I'm using equation 2. I'm using equation 2 and I'm substituting this expression for 5h. Substitute for 5h. And now I've got the second equation set up so that I only have one variable. I only have one variable now, and I'll go, I can, on this side of the equation, I see that I have 2 like terms, so I need to combine them. So I have 25.40. What happens when I combine minus 5s and plus 7s? What do I end up with? 2s. So I've got plus 2s. And I still have the 2918 here. And now I've got myself a nice little two-step equation. A nice little two-step equation where I'm going to subtract 2540 from both sides. When I subtract 2540 over here, I have to do a little bit of math on my own. 0 from 8 is 8. Can't take 4 from 1, so I'm going to borrow over here. Make that I'm going to have to borrow 1 from there. And, oh my goodness, we're going to make that the 4 is going to, we're going to make that an 11. And 11 minus 4 is 7. And we'll make this a 9 because we had to borrow 1 to make that. And then we have, making it an 8, we have $3.78. However you have to do that to get that $3.78, let's pause and make sure that I'm right. All you have to do is subtract. And yeah, you got to show that. You've got to do that on your own, on your scratch paper. So you got $3.78, but what does that equal? 2s. That's the price of 2 sodas. So divide that by 2, and the price of a soda is $1.89. You have to do that without a calculator. So you might have to break out a little bit of, math, a little bit of old school math. 2 goes into 3 one time. Subtract that 2, you've got 17. 2 goes into 17 8 times. Subtract that 16, bring down that 8, and you got your $1.89. Now that's the cost for 1 soda. But the question asks you to find the difference in the cost of the sandwich and the soda. So now that you know that 1 soda costs $1.89, take that back. Take the answer from step 2. I know what you're thinking. That's too much. But that is a killer thought. That thought takes every chance you've got of getting a problem right. And do you know how many people will miss the proficiency on an exam by 1 question because they thought that question was too much? Because how many of the questions are too much, if we're honest with each other? All of them. All of them are just too much. And so that thought kills any chance you have of passing a test. So you've got to banish that thought. Just get used to it. It's going to be too much. Okay, back to it. We're going to take the answer from step 2 and substitute in either equation, whichever one you want to work with. We've got this S equals $1.89. Don't we need to know what H equals? And the only way for us to find that here is for us to take either one of these. And I'm just going to take the first one because I like the $25.40 better than the $29.18. So we know that 5H with the first equation plus 5S equals $25.40. But now I know that S equals $1.89. So 5H plus 5 times $1.89 equals $25.40. You follow me? Okay, it's a long road, and it's got some curves in it, but we're going to get there. Okay, how are you going to find 5 times $1.89 without a calculator? That's too much. Okay, so we're going to take $1.89 and multiply it by 5. And 9 times 5 is 45, and carry the 4. And 8 times 5 is, 40. Oh, you're counting on your fingers and you're doing all that, and it's 40, and we add 4, and that's 44. And we carry that 4. And 1 times 5 is, you're like, yes, at least I know that. And 5 plus 4 is 9. So those 5 sodas cost $9.45. But I still don't know what the ham sandwiches cost. And almost every time in these systems of equations problems, you get down to a point where you've got like a 2-step equation. What's our next step? We subtract 945. When we subtract 945, on the left-hand side of the equation, we're left with 5h. On the right-hand side of the equation, we've got to subtract this, so we're going to borrow. 10 minus 5 is 5. We're going to borrow here. 13 minus 4 is 9. We're going to borrow here. 14 minus 9 is 5. So we got $15.95 left to spend on the ham sandwiches. And we divide both of these by 5. And h equals $15.95 divided by 5. So 3 and 1. Whoop, that should be a 5 and 9. So I think this restaurant has a pretty good price for their ham sandwiches, but I'm not impressed with their price for the soda. If the question asks you how much a ham sandwich costs, you got it. If the question asks you how much a soda costs, you got it. But the question is asking you how much more does the ham sandwich cost. So you have to do $3.19 minus the $1.89. And when we subtract all that, we get that the difference is $1.30.
Yay.
That's all I have to say about that.
Yay.
With solving it with a system of equations. I heard one of you say that. I didn't do all that, but you got it? So you're going to tell us what you did.
Yay.
Can you?
It's still going.
Oh, and that's all I have to say about that.